Hi friends! As you can see, I'm here in Modesto, California this morning. I'm standing here on I Street, just a few blocks east of Highway 99, in front of the historic Modesto Archway. One of my all-time favorite movies is American Graffiti, directed by George Lucas. And the movie is based on his experiences growing up here back in the 1950s and 60s. So I thought I'd spend a few hours here today visiting some of his old hangouts. I'm hoping to find his childhood home, the high school that he attended, the streets where he cruised as a teenager, the American Graffiti statue that the city honored him with in 1997, and I heard that there's even a Legends of the Cruise Walk of Fame that I'm going to try to find and show you as well. So let's go see how many of these sites we can find today. Wow, look at this beautiful mansion across the street. And look at that cool car right out of American Graffiti. I'm still on I Street, and I'm heading to George Lucas Plaza, which I believe is just a block away. But this historic home definitely caught my eye, so I thought I would just make a quick stop and take a closer look around. So I guess back in the day, this is where you would hitch your horse. And it's a pretty impressive entrance. So let's walk around here. Here's a plaque. It's a little far away, but feel free to pause the video and read it. So we can get a little larger. So this is I Street and 15th Street. And I see a sign over here, so let's go see what that says. McHenry Mansion, built 1883. Okay, so it's got hours. Tours start at the Visitor Center. Free admission. That's the one thing about being an early bird is it makes it difficult to take tours because most of the time tours are, later in the day. And I don't know if you can see the arch from here or not. Yeah, you actually can. So there's the archway off in the distance. Just to give you an idea of where it's located. So just 2 blocks north of the McHenry Mansion is this statue dedicated to George Lucas. This is called George Lucas Plaza. American Graffiti premiered on August 2nd, 1973, and it was set in Modesto in 1962. The story follows a group of teenagers as they try to get in one last night of fun, cruising around town and hanging out at Mel's Drive-In as summer vacation comes to an end. The film was a critically acclaimed success, and in 1974 earned 5 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Supporting Actress for Candy Clark. It also went on to become one of the highest grossing films of all time and set the stage for George Lucas's next project, Star Wars, which premiered 4 years later in 1977. Star Wars went on to become the 5th highest grossing media franchise of all time and the 2nd highest grossing film franchise of all time. And it all started with the success of American Graffiti. And there was even a sequel titled More American Graffiti, which was released in 1979. I really liked Star Wars, but I loved American Graffiti. So it's fun being here today to see this really cool statue dedicated to George Lucas and the movie American Graffiti. As I mentioned, American Graffiti is one of my all-time favorite films. I remember when it came out in the theater, seeing it at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen times in the theater. No surprise, I'm sure, to any of you who watch this channel, since my whole channel is dedicated to the past, and especially the 50s and 60s when I grew up. So I would say American Graffiti is in my top 10, maybe my top 5 films of all time. How about you? Is it one of your favorite films? And how about cruising? How many of you cruised around town, the towns that you grew up in? I remember very distinctly cruising every Friday and Saturday night on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood back when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. I had a friend who had a car. I didn't even have a license at the time when we first started cruising Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Boulevard. And this was back in the 1960s, early 70s. It was pretty much the way George Lucas used to cruise here in Modesto. So I could definitely relate. Can any of you? So now let's head over to his former childhood home and also to his high school. As you can see, Google Maps indicates that his home is just 1.2 miles away from the statue here. You can also see that his elementary school, John Muir, is just about 6 blocks from his former house, And his high school, Thomas Downey, is about 12 blocks from his former home. All right, let's see if we can see it. All right, so I think it was this house right here. I think I've seen pictures. So it's 534, and let's see here. See if it has the address on it. Boy, lots of cars blocking. Oh, there it is, 530. That's why I missed it. It's on the curb. Boy, that sun is bright. Yeah, so this is George Lucas's childhood home here in Modesto, California. And it's just 5 minutes from downtown Modesto. Probably walk there in about 15-20 minutes. It's really close. And his statue is just maybe a mile or two from here. And this looks to me like it must have looked pretty much just like this when he was going here, when he was going to high school here. Now, of course, they didn't have electronic signs like this back then. But these buildings sure look original. Thomas Downey Auditorium. And, you know, I'm noticing something that I noticed just the other day as well. There are no gates and fences around this high school. In Southern California, I don't think there are any high schools that are not locked down behind gates and fences these days. Make a difference, Downey. Okay, I guess that's their motto. Thomas Downey High School. Now, doesn't that just look like the kind of high school you would see in American Graffiti? It's so all-American. A real taste of Americana here. Circa 1950s and 60s. And here's another look at the front of the campus from across the street. Even though American Graffiti was based on life in Modesto, it wasn't filmed here. The majority of the scenes were filmed in Petaluma, California, which is about 40 miles north of San Francisco and 120 miles north of Modesto. Some of the additional scenes were filmed in nearby San Francisco, Sonoma, Richmond, Novato, Concord, San Rafael, and Mill Valley. Every year in May, the town of Petaluma has an American Graffiti festival. I believe it was canceled last year because of the worldwide health crisis, and the dates for this year's festival are still kind of up in the air. But if it is held this year, I definitely would like to be there. The town of Modesto also has an annual American Graffiti Festival each year in June, so I'd definitely like to come back for that as well. Have any of you attended either of these festivals in past years? If so, please share your experiences with us. And look at this fun mural. It's just down the street from the high school, and of all the fun murals that I've seen today all around the city of Modesto, I think this has to be my favorite. It's definitely the most fun. If you love street art and murals, Modesto is definitely a great place to find them. Modesto also still has a couple of historic movie theaters right here in the downtown area. And how cool would it have been to have watched American Graffiti when it first came out in one of these theaters in the town where the film was inspired? It's also kind of weird to think that when he was growing up, George Lucas probably watched many movies here in these theaters that probably helped inspire him to become a filmmaker. And years later, his films would play to sold-out crowds in these same theaters. I wonder if they still play American Graffiti here in these theaters during their annual American Graffiti Festival. Now I'm on 10th Street, which is the street that George Lucas made famous for cruising back in the 1960s. They even now have a walk of fame on this street called Legends of the Cruise. So let's walk around and see who's here. The Walk of Fame or Walk of Stars is right across the street from the theater, and at first I'm noticing lots of names that I don't recognize. I think in addition to the stars of the film, these are the names of some of the people that used to cruise down this street back in the good old days when you were a teenager and that was the thing to do. Do you guys recognize any of these names? They also have quite a few of these really interesting historical signs telling about the history of the movie, about the town, about movie theaters, and this Legends of the Cruise Walk of Fame. The type is very small, but if you happen to be watching this on a big screen, you might be able to pause and read it. Historic Graffiti Cruise Route. American Graffiti, I drove cars, chased girls. I think a lot of people did, which is the whole idea behind the title. A very American experience, George Lucas. Now you can just pause this if you want to read it. I'll get a little bit closer to make it a little bit easier. It's very tiny type. It says, were you there? Tell your story at modestocruiseroute.com. Let's see if there's any names that I recognize. Well, of course, here's one. George Lucas. So these older plaques here seem to all be stars from the movie. And then maybe later on they added others that were, just locals who actually cruised the boulevard. Maybe they're friends of George Lucas. Yeah, see, here's another one from the movie, Paul and Matt. Here's Bo Hopkins. Legend of the Cruise, Modesto Walk of Fame. Looks like they need a new one. It's been cracked. And if I hadn't just eaten breakfast, I would have tried one of these graffiti dogs. And this week I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to my newest Patreon supporter, Joseph LaBianco. Thank you for your donation, Joseph. That was very kind of you, and I really appreciate it. And this is just one street over from 10th Street where the movie theater is and where the American Graffiti Walk of Stars is located. So if you enjoyed today's trip down memory lane, don't forget to subscribe so you'll be alerted when I upload the next one. And until next time, thanks for sharing the memories, everybody.